Some rivers just carve canyons. Others build cities in the desert and feed tens of millions of people. The Colorado River does all of that. But right now, this mighty river is at the very center of a crisis that stretches across two nations and affects all of us. Okay, let's dive into this complex story of a river that's been pushed to its absolute limit. First, let's just start with a number: 40 million. That is how many people in the American West and in Mexico depend on this one single river system for the water that comes out of their taps every single day. And here's the kicker: all 40 million of those people, not to mention some of the biggest agricultural regions on the continent, are all relying on a lifeline that is literally shrinking right before our eyes. To really get a grip on this problem, you first have to appreciate just how essential this river truly is. I mean, it's not just some line on a map. It's the artery of the American Southwest. The scale here is just incredible. The river snakes its way over 2,000 kilometers, all the way from the Rockies down to Mexico. On the way, it supplies these massive desert cities. We're talking LA, Phoenix, Vegas, and it irrigates vast tracts of farmland. So, how in the world did this essential lifeline get so strained? Well, it really boils down to some very simple and frankly very flawed math that was done about a century ago. The key term you have to understand is this: over-allocated. The best way to think about it is like a bank account, right? For decades, we've been writing checks for more water than was ever actually in the account, and now the bill is finally coming due. And this right here perfectly illustrates the two forces that are just squeezing this river dry. On one side, you've got skyrocketing demand, because, more people, more cities, more development. And on the other side, climate change means less snowpack feeding the river and way more water just evaporating into the hot, dry air. So, with all these promises, where is the water actually going? Well, this chart is kind of staggering. A massive 70 to 80% of the Colorado River's water is used for agriculture. And we're not just talking about the lettuce in your salad. A huge chunk of that goes to really thirsty crops like alfalfa, which is grown in the desert to be used as cattle feed. This one fact is absolutely central to the whole political battle over the river. And the consequence of this great squeeze? Well, it's stark and it's visible. You've probably seen the pictures of the famous bathtub rings around Lake Mead. Those rings show just how far the water levels have plummeted. It's a terrifying visual of a system in serious distress. So, faced with this epic imbalance, we humans did what we do best. We tried to engineer our way out of the problem. We built one of the most complex, most ambitious water management systems on the entire planet. Now, there's a fancy official name for this philosophy. It's called Integrated Drainage Basin Management. The goal, at least in theory, is pretty simple: treat the whole river as one giant system and try to balance everyone's needs to keep the conflicts from boiling over. And these are the legendary tools of that control system. We're talking about massive, towering dams like the Hoover and Glen Canyon. They created the two largest reservoirs in the entire country, Lake Mead and Lake Powell, which basically act as the system's giant water batteries. So the whole thing basically works in a four-step process. First, the reservoirs store all that spring snowmelt. Second, the dams release that water in a really controlled, regulated way. Third, a network of canals carries it hundreds of miles away. And hey, as a nice little bonus, the whole system generates a ton of clean hydroelectric power along the way. But here's the thing: this isn't just a national issue. A river doesn't care about lines on a map, and the Colorado runs right through an international border. And that is where this story gets even more complicated and way more contentious. So a really key number to remember here is 1.5 billion. That's how much water, in cubic meters, the United States promised to deliver to Mexico every single year under a treaty signed way back in 1944. But a promise on paper is one thing, and the reality on the ground can be something else entirely. As this quote makes pretty clear, Mexico is at the end of the line, so it often gets less water than it was promised, especially when the whole system is stressed by drought. And it all boils down to the simple, powerful geography of the situation. The U.S. is the upstream country. It controls the taps. And that creates a pretty fundamental power imbalance in this whole relationship. And for decades, the consequences of this downstream in Mexico were honestly catastrophic. So much water was taken out upstream that the river literally just vanished into the sand before it could reach the ocean. A huge, vibrant delta ecosystem completely collapsed. After decades of damage and all this tension, a new idea started to take hold. Maybe, just maybe, cooperation would work better than constant conflict. And that has led to a fragile, but really hopeful new chapter in this story. You can really see the evolution in thinking on this timeline. We started with this rigid treaty back in '44, then a slow, painful recognition in the '90s that things were a disaster, and then a breakthrough. A series of diplomatic agreements, called minutes, started to introduce flexibility and actual cooperation. So what makes this new approach so different? Well, it's what it allows for. Instead of being stuck with a fixed number, the two countries can now actually share the burden during a shortage. They can invest together in making things more efficient, and, crucially, they can agree to release water specifically for the environment. And this slide right here, this shows the potential. These planned pulse flows of water have been sent down the final dried-up stretch of the river, and they've started bringing life back to small parts of the delta. It's proof that with cooperation, ecological restoration is actually possible. But, and this is a really big but, we can't get ahead of ourselves. These successes are fragile. The core challenges, that upstream power dynamic, the intense competition for every single drop, and the massive overarching threat of a hotter, drier climate, none of that has gone away. Which leaves us all with this final critical question. The cooperation we're seeing on the Colorado is a real beacon of hope, not just here, but for shared rivers all over the world. But as the pressure keeps mounting in a hotter and thirstier world, can these delicate political agreements really hold up against the powerful current of demand and climate change?